Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, where we bring you the latest news, issues, and changes happening in the energy sector. Our focus today is on the fine balance between energy supply and defence security. Finnish police are currently investigating whether a Russian ship was involved in the sabotage of the Estlink 2 electricity cable running between Finland and Estonia. It's believed the anchor of a targa damaged the cable. Nato says it's enhanced its military presence in the Baltic Sea, and Estonia has sent a patrol ship to protect the remaining Estlink 1 interconnector. Repairs to Estlink 2 will take many months. Estonia's power supply is now dramatically reduced, and prices in the country are likely to be significantly higher this year due to the outage. It's the third incident in less than a month in the Baltic Sea. Will there be more, or is it a question of if or when there will be a response to this new form of hybrid warfare? Whether it's data cables or power links being cut, it all highlights a volatile situation in Northern Europe. Setting the scene in this episode is Montel's Nordics editor, Olav Vilnes. Olav, what happened on Christmas Day and why did it spook the markets?
Yeah, it's something that you probably didn't notice at once. Everyone were off having their Christmas dinners. And then suddenly we saw on the messages on the different news channels that there was something happening with the power cable in the Baltic Sea. And I just checked in, went in there, I saw on the Nord Pool site, and I saw that this Estlink 2 cable was cut off. And you think, once again, reminding back to what happened to the gas pipeline 1 year ago and also to the telecoms cables several times over the last few years. So you get that reminder, and then of course you start investigating what is this, and you got a sense of the seriousness when you saw the market message from the Finnish TSO saying that this cable could be out of operation for 6 months into August, and that's still the best guess they've provided. And also when reading about what happened there, the Finnish police quickly took action, went out there, they boarded the ship, they steered it into Finnish waters where it is now confiscated while they're doing examinations. I think they've been praised for that, the swift action taking the ship before it could do more damage. I think also it's interesting that this ship was registered in the Cook Island, but is also believed to be part of Russia's shadow fleet of tankers that ships owe a lot of Russia under false flags. And of course, it looks very much like this is, at least when you hear from Estonian, from Finnish authorities, that this is deliberate act from someone, most likely Russia. And the market impact is also quite visible. If you look at the power prices in Estonia, they have risen quite strongly relative to Finnish prices since this cable went offline. It represents roughly 40% of the Baltic region's import capacity from the Nordic region. And given that the Baltic region is a net importer, it inflates prices there and locks cheaper power into Finland. So while, for example, Finland can then expect maybe €8 lower price in the first half this year than it would have had with the cable in operation, Estonia could probably see prices rise €20, according to some Montel analytics forecasts.
Thank you, Olav. There are clear echoes of the Cold War. Joining me, Richard Sverrisson, is Professor Paula Kivima, Research Professor at the Finnish Environment Institute in Helsinki. A warm welcome to you, Paula.
Thank you.
And to give us his expert view from an energy markets perspective is Fredrik Bodacker, founding partner and CEO of Bodacker Partners in Malmö. A warm welcome to you and welcome back, Fredrik.
Thank you. Good to be back.
If I can start with you, Paula, what do you make of this latest incident affecting not just power, but also data lines in the Baltic Sea?
I think what's obvious is that this shows that the security of critical infrastructure is facing more risks from intentional actions from other actors than before. And I can refer back to the beginning of 2020s when I conducted interviews with many experts on the energy and security field, that at that time many experts believed that the time of physical risks and wars is over and that the energy infrastructure is mainly facing cyber hybrid risks. And of course, we can now all see that this proved not to be the case from 2020 from 2022 onwards. And the recent years shows, in a way, both physical incidents as well as an increased number of attempted cyber attacks on the energy sector. And I think it's very clear that the sabotage of energy infrastructure or the data cables is becoming a means of geopolitical influence, which needs actions. And I also think that this means tightening connections between the defense and energy domains. And at least in smaller northern European countries than I best know of, such as Estonia, Finland, and Norway, such connections have been rather small. There have been some joint exercises and drills, but this was really not a key issue before. And this energy defense connection is a rather new one. Although, for instance, Nato has done work on energy security and research on alternative fuels. So I think these kind of increased risks of disruption to the critical infrastructure mean, of course, increased costs of protecting this infrastructure. And ultimately, of course, these costs trickle down to consumers via tax spending and additional charges on energy bills.
But do you see like an increase then, or an urgency about increasing the link between energy infrastructure and defense in light of these incidents?
I mean, I think this collaboration is already or has already intensified. I think we see it partly in the meeting organized by the Finnish President Alexander Stubb this week in Helsinki. But also, I think there's been a lot of interaction. Of course, then the question is, okay, we may now see political signs of this, but have institutional frameworks now created for this collaboration? I think this is still an open question.
Absolutely. I mean, Frederick, what's your view here? How has the market reacted to these incidents?
Yeah, I think it's of course quite obvious there that it's a tougher situation for the Estonian market, and if we look at Finland, it's they will lose an opportunity to export, let's say, excess wind, so lower prices and perhaps more negative prices that Finland really don't need more, or the rest of the Nordic market. But I would say, with that said, it seems like, okay, it's a short-term event. We have seen these several times before, not where it's a large cables or production means disappear. So I don't think that we've yet seen any longer-term effects on this. And as I said, traders seem to shrug these things off and then they move on, business as usual. But if this let's say should continue and we see more of these, of course, there will be. I would see that the longer curve would also come up.
But it's as you're saying, the risk is for lower price in Finland and higher ones in Estonia. To put it very crudely, Fredrik. I mean, you put it better. But
yeah, I would say so. Of course, that trickles over to other markets also somehow. But there are also many uncertainties on the short term. It could be super cold. Or it could be very warm. It could be less wind. So it's very hard to say something in before we actually see how the weather develops.
Exactly. That's a key element here. The fundamental factors such as the temperature and winds. But Paolo, if I return to you, how frequent have incidents like this been? I mean, they seems to be occurring more and more regularly in recent months. Over the course of 23-24.
We've had some technical disruptions before to electricity interconnections. And I think the most recent example is actually Estlink 1 damage, which occurred last January, and they kept, I think it was fixed only in early September. And at least to my knowledge, this is some sort of technical fault. But certainly, if one looks at the frequency in which these incidents are now reported, indicate that there's more kind of intentional damage to this kind of critical infrastructure that we need to be concerned about.
And is it just the Baltic Sea potentially, Paolo, or is it beyond? I mean, should we be worried about all the power interconnectors between countries in northern and southern Europe?
I mean, I haven't followed that so much, but I think I've heard that there has been some, at least, attempts in other parts of Europe. But I also think that this is, even if most of the events have occurred on the Baltic Sea, I don't think this is just a question for Nordic or Baltic countries, because if we actually look at the European energy market, we're talking about kind of an interconnected electricity market that has been the goal of the European Union. And it in a way, indirectly, even if we're not talking about market prices, these kind of critical infrastructure damage harms the whole idea of an integrated European market.
And an integrated European market is absolutely crucial for the energy transition, or if should the energy transition be successful, so that you share both an oversupply of potential renewables, and also you help your neighbours when they have less. That's the idea anyway. But Fredrik, if I can turn to you, I mean, Sweden has a slightly different outlook on security when it relates to critical infrastructure. Now we've seen with the TSO Svenska Kraftnät has not revealed details on the available capacity in its grid. Is this now an advantage, would you say, for Sweden?
Perhaps, but my thinking is that connecting to what you said about the development of renewables here, that it doesn't have to be negative, because what this shows is the need for distributed power production. And I'm let's say a strong believer in how the battery storage will, let's say, change the whole market. And if you see a near future with wind batteries, wind solar batteries, you have this, let's say, perfect distributed power source. So these worries could actually be positive for the development of renewables. Maybe not the coming months, but if we look over a couple of years. But to get back to your question, yeah, I'm sure that there is a lot of extra capacity that we are not told about, and that's kind of also part of their assignment to protect us for these things. That's I recall, or actually don't recall, because it's 1992, and I recall when it happened, but I was not active in the market. There was this. I think it's called the strainer incident at the Barsebäck nuclear power plant, where some isolation got caught in somewhere, so the cooling did not work, and that meant that they had to close down 5 nuclear power plants immediately, because so Barsebäck 1, 2, Oskarshamn 1 and 2, and Ringhals 1 was closed. 5 nuclear power plants in Sweden were closed due to the risk of this thing. So the system, at least at that point, was very resilient to huge events. And I think we've seen similar occurrences before, that we can take this. It affects prices, but it's not an end of the world event. I think we need to put this into relation to what we're seeing in Ukraine, for example, where people are struggling and a terrible situation, and we are kind of worried that we are losing a couple of 100 megawatts or 1,000 megawatts.
Yep, that's a good point, Fredrik. And I think I also like the point of that. This is an incentive also for more local solutions, whether it be batteries and wind or solar in regional or local areas. I think that's also very interesting. But Paula, I think it's also clear to important to emphasize that there's been no claim of responsibility, but the finger does tend to point at Russia. What's your view here?
This is the case, while we of course cannot completely overrule the fact that other actors with specific interests would also do this, either states or other types of actors. But I do think that the timing of this sabotage links quite conveniently to the desynchronization of the Baltic countries from the electricity system of Russia in the start of February 2025. So one could think, is this kind of a sign to threaten this process? For those not aware of this, it's basically the desynchronization is happening because after the Baltic countries became independent from Soviet Union, there was an agreement signed between Belarus, Russia, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. It's called BREL for short. And this kind of agreement formalized that the country's electricity system operate synchronously with the Russian electricity system. And then there's been a really long-term process to synchronize the Baltic countries with the Central European electricity network and desynchronize from the Russian power system. And this was already announced, I think, in 2007. And the reasoning behind this has been national security, of course, but also kind of what the integrated European electricity markets that we've talked about. And this process has also been supported by the EU. So, of course, but this is more speculative, but of course, the timing is quite fitting for this desynchronization to be completed.
Absolutely. What's your view here, Frederick? Do you think this is a kind of a warning shot?
I think that's to say what is called Occam's razor, where you should find the most, let's say, easiest explanation. Or I think it points towards that. But once again, we love to find these explanations, and we've seen that over many years. How one explanation that seemed super plausible at the time, 5 years later we get the real story, and it was something different. That's I'm recalling one incident when I started as a trader. This was 1996 or 1997, where a Danish fishing boat pulled the cable between Sweden and Denmark, and there were a lot of stories that that Danish fisherman had positions in the market, and so he would benefit from rising prices on one side, but then it turned out, I don't know if this is a tall tale or not, but after they repaired the cable, the same fishing boat pulled it once again. It actually was pulled twice, but so that kind of story was killed.
But I take your point. We should be wary of jumping to conclusions before the evidence is on the table and the facts on the table. But of course, it's given the current geopolitical situation, it's there's no surprise that fingers point in certain directions. But Paula, I mean, obviously, security of supply, is very important. We're in January. We're in the middle of the winter. How much planning goes into Plan B for when a major power link goes out of action? What's there as a backup?
I mean, I don't have details on this. I'm not part of these discussions in Finland, for instance. But my understanding is that there's a lot of pre-planning and preparedness taking place in the energy sector, particularly the electricity sector, and by the transmission network operators such as Fingrid in Finland or Estlink in Estonia. And this is already for reasons that production and consumption of electricity must match each time. So they're kind of prepared for different type of circumstances. Sometimes it could also be that there's a technical fault and a nuclear power plant kind of drops off the grid, and then instantly you have to be able to replace 1,000 or 2,000 megawatts. So I think this is kind of natural for the sector. But I think what has helped Finland tremendously in this kind of specific events also is a long-term collaboration across public and private sector organizations. So there's kind of a long history of this. And one effective instance is what's called power pool collaboration. It operates under the National Emergency Supply Organization. It has sort of participation from civil servants, a lot of the energy companies, and basically they do drills and exercises for different types of events and also exchange information. And this collaboration also involves the defense forces. So I think having had these kind of long-term mechanisms in place before 2022 has also helped to tackle different type of crisis situations, which I'm sure they might have had these cases before, but I don't know. I'm not an insider to these discussions.
And I think, Frederick, you made the good point, where the situation, we're not in the situation which is in the Ukraine, which had its energy infrastructure completely, targeted by the Russians and, gone through several phases of destruction, has had to rebuild constantly. But yet, what are you confident in, the system that it's safe? I mean, that if it came under an attack, if there was a view on a substation or an offshore wind park or a cable that had a larger effect than a couple of 100 megawatts, are you confident that the system could cope with that? That we're in a set degree of readiness for such an instant?
Yes, I'm very confident. I would say I'm I'm an electrical engineer in my background, and it's a fantastic machine. It is constructed to handle these events, and it's also a little ironic, I think, that what Russia did to Ukraine, that raised the power prices, gas prices first, and then power prices to these incredible levels we saw in 2022. That has actually prepared us for this. So it has given, I would say, a lot of people, ordinary people that never thought about electricity before. They've seen high power prices, and they started to think about this. Can I switch off my? I don't have to cook a steak and be in the jacuzzi at the same time, or whatever. So I think that is ironic. That perhaps it has prepared us in a way. What worries me more is that, these scariest words there are. I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. That's that will, let's say, destroy the markets and the market signals, because at a point like this, I think it's more important than ever to have clear market signals that shows where are the vulnerabilities in the system. If we try to fix this somehow with policies, I know it's a balance, but I'm a little afraid that we will put on policies that kind of hides these signals that we really need to show where are the weaknesses in our system.
If I may continue, I think actually I'm quite a big fan of spot market pricing also for consumers, not of course to everyone, not for those who don't want it or heat their houses with electricity, but in other terms, I think the fact that individual consumers can choose to be responsive to prices massively improves energy security, because also it means we have a system, demand response based system, that when something happens, people are already used to this idea that I'm actually heating up my sauna like they do in the Nordic countries, or using an oven or washing my clothes at a time. And of course, when you're talking about a large number of people, this will have a significant impact on the sort of consumption at critical times too.
Absolutely, these price signals are very, very important. I think that's crucial. We're in this market dynamic. But I think, Fredrik, are you then, if I can interpret you correctly, are you afraid of an overreaction from the policy side, from governments, to say we know best and we know how to fix this kind of exposure to geopolitical risks?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. But we've seen, let's say, several times before, let's say, good intentions. It tends not to be optimal because to have a few people decide what is the best, I think having price signals is much better. I see this. This is the typical, let's say, gray rhino case. We know that it's there. There is a risk that someone destroys cables or substations and all that, and we know it has high impact, and we're kind of okay. We look away from it. We have to live with it. But by showing that we are resilient, that every person do not go down to the sauna when the prices are high, perhaps that is the deterring effect to do these things, because we have shown that it doesn't have an effect. You can take off a couple of cables, you can blow a substation for us, but it doesn't affect us that much. It will affect you more because you will get sanctions and X, Y, Z.
Yep, I think that's a fair point. But Paula, if you have a reflection on what Fredrik said there, or
if I can quickly respond, I disagree to some point, because I have looked at this energy and security interface from around 2019, and what happened in countries that there were countries that believe that markets will deliver energy security the best. And this happened in the United Kingdom, partly to Estonia. Of course, I'm now referring more to gas than electricity. But what was found actually that there's still a place for traditional gas storages in this respect. And these countries have now reinstated gas storage. So like purely relying on markets for energy security has also its own risks. And I do think that we do need public interventions, but it's of course finding the right balance is the tricky part.
Absolutely, I think it's also creating that architecture, that infrastructure in the background for markets to be able to react is also important. But Paula, I was just going to say, there's been several incidents, as we've highlighted, And there hasn't really been of this hybrid warfare of cutting both internet cables and power cables. But there hasn't really been a response. I mean, when can we expect a response, if at all? And what kind of response could that be?
Yeah, that's a bit of a tricky question, of course, and I don't know what goes on behind closed doors. Certainly, as I mentioned earlier, I was surprised by the lack of formalized interaction between energy policy making and defense and security policy making before 2022. And I hope this has increased, but I guess it has also focused quite a lot on kind of questions of security of supply of critical raw materials and such like. I don't know what's happening or if enough action is happening on the defense side. Of course, now we've read the latest news on 14th of January on how NATO will increase its presence on the Baltic Sea. So I think we can expect some actions, but I guess it's been maybe enough hasn't happened in the last 3 years that we've had this increasing risk.
Fredrik, in terms of prices, this is one element in the equation where we see massive amounts of uncertainty, huge amounts of volatility, prices soaring at times of no wind in the dark and cold weather to hugely negative prices. Have you, for a number of reasons, this geopolitical incident or this hybrid warfare incident increases the sense of unpredictability and potentially the volatility. Have you ever known markets to be this volatile? I mean, you have a long history as a trader. Is this something that is new, or is this something just that you've seen before and it's just something that you guys have to deal with?
Now this, I think this is new. It's even if we just say cut out the 2022 with insane price levels there, it's this volatility. I haven't seen this before. It's what used to hit us before was if there were a long weekend and the weather drastically changed over a long weekend. The Easter weekend is a typical example where weather forecasts are a little uncertain. And I've seen that a couple of times in let's say in my career, how markets completely turned around and there were huge volatilities, but that is nothing compared to what we see now. But to come back there also to this balance of having protective measures and letting there be a free market. In the winter 2003, we had very high power prices. There were not so much snow and not so much water in the hydro reservoirs. It was very cold and prices really went to the sky there. And this, let's say, triggered so many let's say innovations and ways to find power production. There were people trying to get hold of the nuclear icebreakers to connect them to the Nordic systems and everything. So I will come back to that. That it's this will mean that we will find ways to manage this. But yeah, to answer your question, no, this is something special.
This is a new situation. I mean, Paula, does this have ramifications also for new cables being, potentially if they're planning Estlink 3 or if there's a connection between Sweden and potentially, parts of the Baltics or even Poland? Would this be a major factor in that kind of, in both the economic and the political calculations into if it makes sense or not?
I haven't heard yet anything about that topic as such. Of course, one idea to safeguard sort of transmission across borders would be to build more interconnections, but then that would cost more money. So it's also, which would of course then go to consumers' electricity bills. So I think that's kind of an open question. How do you secure it? Because I think all options are quite costly, either constructing in a more secure way, then I would guess that besides construction costs, then any technical faults would be harder to access and fix. And this sort of surveillance on the Baltic Sea by the defense forces is also quite costly. But I would hope, certainly, I think, from the perspective of really advancing the energy transition and the electrification, that we will still see these kind of plans in the future too.
And Frederick, a final question for you as well. I think, is there a danger here that we see a backlash against sort of interconnected markets? There's this food to feed the populists who say, no, we keep the power prices within certain countries. Let's not export our powers to our neighbors. Let's make sure that we have the best and cheapest possible prices for our own population first and foremost.
Yes, I think we are already seeing that, and let's say with some Swedish politicians holding back interconnectors, and unfortunately, but this is the way it has been. Let's say all my career, we run in one direction, and we see that as the only direction for the foreseeable future, and then suddenly we don't. We run in the other direction. So I think it's very, very dangerous that we are now going on this path, because we need more interconnectors. I'm also thinking about all the offshore wind farms that yes, they have been stopped from the Swedish defense, and this strengthens that case that they can't be built because they are, let's say, interrupting radars. But also they are vulnerable for the interconnectors out to the offshore wind farms. So there are it seems like we will go in this direction now for a couple of years until the next thing happens.
Until we change direction again, maybe. And a final comment from you, Paula.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, add to Frederick's point, that that's also a costly option, is not to build the interconnectors, because it means that each country, the more separated you are from the joint markets, the more reserve capacity you have to have, which costs money, and especially during peak, to meet the demand for electricity during peak times. And also energy or electricity investments require quite large investments. So when they see a broader market to which you can supply, that of course also speeds up the investment. So I think both options in a way are expensive, but in different ways.
Perfect. Paula and Frederick, thank you for a fascinating and very insightful discussion. Yeah, thank you for being guests on the Montel Weekly Podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.